here we are, Matthew 19. We're in verses 1 through 12, okay? 1 through 12. We're going to read God's word, and then we're going to frame it in context and then move into it verse by verse, which is, by the way, what I hope we do every Sunday here. Now, when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Haven't you read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female and said, 'Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh'? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it wasn't so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it." Quite a finish, huh? I mean, some of you are like, wait, what was that about at the end there? And so, listen, this is why we're committed to expository preaching. I guarantee you, if you were not committed to expository preaching, you would not preach verses 10 through 12. You would just find some mysterious way to run out of time at the end of verse 9 and close in prayer. But we're not doing that because we're committed to the exposition of God's word, all of it. And so we're going to get into it. And actually, I'm praying that it's practically helpful for a whole bunch of people in our church. So we saw in Matthew 18, by way of context, do you remember this? Matthew 18 was the keys or the marks of true greatness, 5 marks of true greatness in chapter 18 that really kind of mark what it means to live life within the context of the church body. We called them dynamics of body life. And it's really where Jesus kind of brings forward what it means to live life together in the context of the local church. And those 5 marks are marks of true greatness in the local church. Every mark is marked by humility. So if you want to be great in the kingdom of heaven, great among the people of God, the front door and the side door and the back door are humility. And so that's really important for us to see because now Jesus in chapter 19 is on the move. He's on the move. He's heading from Galilee down to Judea. You see it in verse 1, don't you? And that's a really important marker in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's a really key transition in the life of Christ in general. So Luke in his gospel in chapter 9 is starting this last journey of Christ all the way down to Jerusalem. In Luke's gospel, so I just want you to think about Luke and Acts. In Luke's gospel, Luke moves Jesus from Galilee of the nations through Samaria into Judea and then to Jerusalem on the way to the cross. That's Luke's gospel's progression. That's his major focus on the life of Christ. Why is that significant in the light of Acts? Well, because Acts is the story of the gospel of the cross moving from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the nations. Do you see what Luke is doing at the beginning of this journey here? He's showing you that Jesus is moving from the nations, Galilee, to Jerusalem to die. And then that's in Acts now, followed up by the good news of the cross moving from Jerusalem out to Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. Luke and Acts are mirror images of each other with the progress of the gospel being accomplished in Jerusalem and then sounded forth from Jerusalem to where you sit in your chair today. So in the life of Christ, Luke is important, but we're actually in Matthew, and Matthew is only going to take 2 chapters to talk about this journey from Galilee down to Jerusalem. So what are we seeing today? We're seeing Jesus address dynamics of home life now. Dynamics of church life, chapter 18. Dynamics of home life, chapter 19. And the point of today is that Jesus himself is going to teach you about marriage and singleness, so that you can live in either place for the sake of the King. With wherever you find yourself with this dynamic of home life, you are to use it for the sake of the King. So it's good to remember the occasion. We just mapped out the context there. You'll notice in verse 2 that large crowds are following him. So this is different than chapter 18. Chapter 18 was spoken mainly to his disciples by themselves. Chapter 19 now is in the context of a large amount of crowd or people following him, and he's healing them along the way. So we're back into a bit of a public expression of ministry. And in the crowd come the Pharisees. They're back. The Pharisees are back. They haven't showed up for a little while in Matthew, and they're back now, and they're going to be a presence for the rest of the gospel. And they ask a question about the institution of marriage. Their question in verse 3 is pretty straightforward, and it's totally a trap. Not one Pharisee in the country of Israel, not one of them, believed what they actually asked about. Look at verse 3. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause? These guys, man, nobody believed that. What are they doing by asking this question? They're asking a very broad question to see which way Jesus is going to fall. This was the hot potato issue of the day. And so they're asking a question to trap Jesus by forcing him to take a side. There were two schools of Jewish thought with regard to this question about divorce that was biblical. The question comes from Deuteronomy 24, 1-4, which is the divorce passage par excellence in the Old Testament. It was dissected by the Pharisees, and they had two major schools of Jewish thought on this. One was the school of Shammai, and the school of Shammai taught that you could only divorce your wife in the case of sexual immorality. The other school was the school of Hillel, who believed that you could divorce your wife if she even burned the toast. And before you laugh at that, you can make a biblical case for it. Do you want to see how? Turn to Deuteronomy 24. Where do you put the emphasis in the passage? That makes all the difference in the world. Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. This is all the arguments about divorce in Israel at this time, and all the rabbis that were wrestling over it and writing on it were wrestling over this one verse. Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. When a man takes a wife and marries her, listen, here comes the school of Hillel. They're going to put emphasis on this next phrase. If then she finds no favor in his eyes. So there it is. You burn the toast, you're out. I mean, you don't find favor in my eyes. The school of Shammai said, wait a minute, time out, keep reading. They placed emphasis on the next phrase, because he has found some indecency in her. It's related to the Hebrew term for nakedness. There's some expression of nakedness that she exhibited that was indecent. So they kind of link that to adultery. And so, which phrase is it in the Hebrew? Depending on where you want to put the emphasis, you can land on one side or the other. And so they're asking, the Pharisees are, back in Matthew chapter 19, you interpret the verse, Jesus. You give us this sense of it and tell us what it actually means. So Jesus does what he does best. He takes the hot potato question and he doesn't answer it directly. He actually answers it better than answering it directly. He goes back to the beginning. Before I get there, we need to go here. Before I answer your presenting question, I need to get to the heart of the matter. Let's go back, not to Deuteronomy and the law. Let's go back before the law to the beginning, to creation. And Jesus, in his wisdom, takes us back to creation. This is God's initial word and words on marriage. And the Pharisees weren't asking about this. They were asking about what comes after this. But it's safe to say that God is interested, Christ is interested, and when we talk about marriage, going back to the beginning. So several truths emerge from God's word and Christ's word about your marriage. And I say your marriage because Jesus is speaking not just historically to these guys, he's speaking literally in real time to you right now and your marriage. So our doctrine of the Bible and our understanding of preaching means that when the word of God is preached biblically, then God himself is speaking to his people. So you, married person, are in the text, in the sense that Jesus is speaking directly to you about your marriage. And the first thing he wants you to know is that marriage is complementary. Marriage is complementary. Verse 4. You see it there as Jesus starts to crack open his answer. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? In other words, the first thing to know is that marriage is between a man and a woman. This is true from the beginning. God created people with one of two genders, male or female, and their gender always is the same as their biological sex. The idea that's prevalent in our generation, did you hear what I said? In our generation. We should get some perspective on this massive debate. It's been a massive debate for about the past 20 years. The idea prevalent in our generation that someone can separate their gender from their sex is really just an ancient heresy. It's an ancient heresy called Gnosticism that's revived in modern dress. In ancient Gnosticism, the body was considered to be inferior to the soul. So you would look with disdain on your body because you would prize what you thought and felt. Or Gnosticism, and this is a little oversimplified, is what you feel and think is what really matters about who you are, not how you look and about your body. That's Gnosticism. That's similar to today's transgenderism, where whatever gender you feel you are on the inside trumps what your body, your biology is clearly communicating on the outside. The real danger of transgenderism, then, is that it tears the trans person apart at the seams. They declare war on their body. They see their body as something to be basically esteemed to be an enemy until they can win over their body and sink it to the whims of their feelings, which can fluctuate wildly over time, by the way, and with the passing seasons of life. Transgenderism may seem new medically, but it's actually a very old and tired philosophy. It is not new. It's not. The church has been working through this for 1,800 years. This idea that your body is the enemy of your soul and they're in opposition, that's been going around since like the 100s or 200s AD. In fact, it may even be that there's a proto-Gnostic heresy alive in the book of Colossians that Paul himself is dealing with. Two things about that. One, this transgenderism thing is 20 years old at the most. Two, or it's 2,000 years old. We've been here before in church history. It's just with a new technological twist. I hope you can also tell that Jesus' teaching here about marriage being between a man and a woman obviously prohibits homosexual marriage. It also prohibits polygamous marriage. It also prohibits open marriages. God created marriage to be between a man and a woman, and it has been that way from the beginning. And note, this is not because we're taking a political position. This is because this is a biblical position. If someone wants to take this up as a problem, they can talk to you about it or talk to me about it, and all you should do is just say, it's me, but it's me because it's him. I mean, the real problem you have is with Jesus Christ. Take it up with him. Good luck. Now, having said that, There are those in this church who are nearly and dearly connected to people who are wrestling with and or succumbing to this, who are maybe already enmeshed in this. And the Bible on that side, on the ministry side, the Bible is both very clear about God's good design for marriage to be between a man and a woman, and the Bible is also very clear about God's design for people who are caving into this sin to do what anybody else must do to come to Christ. The solution is no different. You just have to turn away from your sin and turn to the truth of who Jesus Christ is, and as he reveals himself to you here. All of us, if you're like thinking and wondering about this, all of us come to Christ in the same way. We acknowledge that we're a sinner through and through, all of us. And we all have to repent. We all have to lay our sin down at the cross and turn away from our sin. We all have to put our faith and our trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as Savior from our sin and the Lord of our life. All of us come to Christ. All of us go to heaven. All of us saved from hell. In the same way, there's one way, one truth, one life. No one goes to the Father except through Jesus Christ. And that applies to everyone. Everyone. Do not make people's sin more powerful than the grace of Christ. So, if all that you see is a political issue, I don't. I see it as an evangelism issue. I see it as an error to correct. And welcome to our generation. Welcome to every generation in the life of the church. The fight might look a little different, maybe. Not much. It's been around a long time. And I just want you to be encouraged. Jesus is a merciful Savior. He will save anyone from any sin who comes to him by faith in him and repentance from their sin. So I just want to say, like, there's the truth of the matter, and there's the grace of the Savior. Both are true. And I also want to encourage us to think about what Jesus mentions next, which is that marriage is nuclear. I hope what you don't understand by that is like you've got nukes that you're not ready to fire off at your spouse. That's not what we mean by nuclear. Like, what we mean is the nuclear family, the nuclear unit. It doesn't get any smaller than this, more foundational than this. Marriage is the core societal relationship. In other words, Jesus says here, build your own home, verse 5. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother. Now, Jesus has been quoting in number 1 there, Genesis 1:27. Now he's moving to Genesis 2:24. And so he's working his way through his Bible, isn't he? Starting from the beginning. And whenever a couple is married, they form their own household separate from their parents. Now, you know, if you've done any premarital counseling or if you've gone through premarital counseling in our church, you know that the things that cause marriages the most strain are 3 things: finances, sex, and parents. I mean, you can say in-laws. I'm just going to say parents, okay? We'll keep it nice here. And I would say that for many of our families in our church, as far as I can tell, it's been a seamless transition. We have 18 weddings that are happening in just Kaleo, the singles ministry, just this year, and there's 25, I think, total across the life of the church. And so there's a boatload of people getting married, and so that's great. I think in most cases, it's going to be a seamless transition from being under your parents' authority to now on into your own life. But sometimes it's true that parents want to intrude. You know, like your mom says, like, hey, so I heard that you and your husband had a conversation about that. How did that go? Oh, he said that. Interesting. What do you mean, interesting? Step back there, Mom, you know? Sometimes, though, it goes the other way. Sometimes the kids get married, and they're like, it's so great to be out from my parents' house, and so great to be out of the basement, and hey, Dad, can you help me out a little bit here? Can you chip in a little bit over here? Can you help out over here? Can you know? And before you know it, the parents are like, hey, I thought you were supposed to have left. I think most times it's seamless and sometimes it's really hard. And so there's a good kind of statement about your marriage. If you're married here, you should be able to say with clear conscience, we exist in our own home. This is our own family, our own household. If you're seeing that you're having strain here with an overly invasive parent, or if you're a parent and your kids are like wanting to come back to the nest, then you need to sit down and have some expectations clarified. Expectations are important to communicate and to understand, and the earlier you address the missteps, the better it's going to be with your parents and your in-laws. Listen to me, a healthy in-law and parent relationship, listen, is one of the greatest blessings on any marriage that anyone could ask for. And the way to get there, for those of you who are younger people and not married, the way to get there to a marriage that has a healthy parent relationship after marriage is to have a healthy parent relationship before marriage. So, students, you don't just get to be all nasty to your dad and like, oh, my dad's a total doofus. And then you get married and you're like, hey, Dad, can I get some financial assistance? You don't get to do that. Start building that relationship now before getting married, and it will serve you well after you get married with that relationship intact. I can tell you that a healthy parental relationship is a massive blessing. An unhealthy one just puts strain on your marriage in all kinds of different ways. So would you ask the Lord, would you help us to leave our mom and dad, but would you help us to have a healthy relationship so that we can honor our mom and dad at the same time? Leave and cleave, Genesis 2:24. In the law, honor your mother and father. That goes to your grave or theirs. And just ask God for help with both. And then, third of all, marriage is exclusive. Hold fast to your spouse. Verse 5. Leave your father and mother and hold fast to your wife. Some old English translations have cleave to your wife. That sounds pretty, kind of creepy almost, but it also makes sense. Like cleave to your wife, like hold on, hold fast. For those married couples out there, it means to unite to your spouse. You are to remain attached to your wife, men, and no other woman. Wives, you are to remain attached to your husband and no other man. This suggests a spiritual and physical purity that allows for no secrets to be kept from your spouse. There are to be no secret texts that your wife doesn't see. There are to be no secret calls that you take that your husband doesn't see. There are to be no secret communications with another woman without your wife knowing about it at any time. And this baby right here is how a lot of secrets get kept. I'm not blaming the device. It's just the presenting issue. So, my wife can check that out at any time. If you text me, she may sometimes read it before I do. When I text women, which I am thoughtful about, like I think about it before I do it, I envision it being public, I just make sure my wife is either on the text line or she sees it. Why would you not want that? Why would you hope that I can just carry on relationships with women and it's gonna be fine? Now we shouldn't lay the blame on men. No, we're actually being careful about ourselves. And so we wanna recognize that marriage is to be exclusive. Cleave to your wife. And listen, if you're dissatisfied, if you're discontented with your husband or your wife, listen, we have a massive amount of help for you in this church. There must be, no joke, 100 people in this church who could encourage you in your marriage, whether that's someone in your CG, or whether that's someone in your men's group or women's group, or whether that's someone in biblical counsel. There's so many people that can help you with your marriage. Do not isolate on this issue, except for with your wife or your husband. Marriage is exclusive. Marriage is nuclear. Marriage is complementary. But notice now Jesus is going to shift to the end of his Bible at the end of verse 6. So, or at the end of verse 5, rather. So, to the end of the Bible now, Jesus jumps. He jumps to Malachi 2:15. Look at your Bibles in verse 5, right at the end there. And the two shall become one flesh. Now, that's an extension of Genesis 2:24, but the two-ness is actually something that Malachi draws out and kind of punctuates in his dealing with marriage at the end of the Old Testament. What is Jesus doing here? He's doing a biblical theology of marriage. He's starting at the beginning of his Bible, and he's going to the end of his Bible. And the message from beginning to end is the same. In Malachi's context, it's to say that marriage is permanent. You are one with your spouse. John Calvin, I think, says it really well here on this point. He says, any man that tears at marital oneness tears at himself, for he is one flesh with his wife. This is why it's so important, everybody, that when you get into an argument with your wife and you're angry at her and you lash out at her, you're actually lashing out at yourself, yo. Come on, like wake up. You're hurting yourself. You're one flesh. Anything that hurts her done by you is hurting you done by you. You're not helping your marriage by winning over your wife. Not winning over your wife, but like winning in an argument. And so if we could just get down, see, this is the thing. So much about talk about marriage is about what you need to do to grow your marriage. Do you see what Jesus is doing here? He's reminding you of the institution of marriage, what marriage is. And what marriage is drives what marriage does. So the next time you get into an argument, as you're kind of getting into it, and your heart's starting to and you kind of like sense, they're like, no way, man, that's not right. No way, he's wrong on that. I gotta, here I stand, I shall do no other. Like I'm taking my stand right here. When you start to go to war, what causes fights and quarrels among you? When you go to war, you're declaring war on your spouse, you think, but you're actually declaring war on yourself. You're one flesh. How might what marriage is as an institution, how might that disposition, if you could just think about that before you jump in, like, nope, I'm gonna win that. Wait, time out, I'm one flesh. What does it take for us to win? Do you see the difference? Like if you could just stop and get this down in your head. This is what marriage is. Therefore, this is what I'll do. I'm one with my wife. I don't need to win my wife, like win and beat her in an argument. So how do we win? Otherwise, we both lose. Does that make sense, you guys? Is this helpful? For those of you who are married, I hope you're going like, okay, that's super helpful now for me. Heading into conflict, I need to remember the institution first, and then the implications second. Marriage is permanent. I just would say, do you remember your wedding vows? About the permanency of marriage, do you remember your wedding vows? When was the last time you recited those? In doing weddings, surprise, a lot of times the vows are very similar to the ones I recited to my wife. So I get to rehearse them as I'm actually saying to someone, repeat after me. Do you know what sometimes I do? I'm standing back here and I'm asking somebody to repeat after me. My wife's right down there. Just a little reminder, okay, now I'm actually going back over my vows. Now I'm not doing that in a way that's letting everybody know like I am right now. But I'm actively recalling, no, this is for us. This is for all of us to hear these vows. You're bearing witness to their vows, but you should be bearing witness to your vows. Weddings are so good to go to because you get reminded about your vows. And that reminds you that it's till death do you part. It would be good for some of us probably to take a little bit of time to ask some questions of our spouse on these points. This is what marriage is. sweetie, honey, bumpkins, hot pumpkin, whatever you say to you, sugar mama, like whatever you say here. And actually, I know some of your guys' names, and you know mine, and so let's not embarrass each other, shall we? Keep all that stuff anonymous. But just go home and ask, how am I doing? How are we with the permanence of marriage? Our oneness, do you sense that from me? Our exclusivity, do you doubt that from me? Does that make sense? Just ask the question. And then you need to listen. So the final thing from not Malachi, now from Jesus himself, is that marriage is a divine institution. That is, God has joined you together. Look at verse 6. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore, this is Jesus' now word to us. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Two observations are important about this phrase. First, this phrase is not taken from the Old Testament mainly. It's taken from Jesus Christ himself. This is his own word on marriage. It's his summary of the Old Testament teaching on marriage. So as the Son of God, who is equal with God, is speaking here, he is speaking as God himself on a par with Scripture. So we have to submit to his authority to speak into our marriage in general and speak into marriage in general and our marriage in particular. You know the word, it's so fun. The word joined is the word glued. I was watching an advertisement, surprise, during a sports game. And so, it's an advertisement. And before I could fast forward the advertisement, this guy came on about glue. And so he was talking about glue, and he put like 3 drops of glue on this like big metal thing. And then he put another metal thing on top of it. And then he hung a car on the joint of that glue, like lifted up the 2 things, the 2 metal pieces, with a car hanging off of it. He's like, that's how strong our glue is. I totally don't believe that. I'm not buying that super glue is that super glue-ish. You know what I mean? But this glue is divine glue. God has glued you together. You didn't glue yourself together when you got married. You weren't doing much when you got married. God was on the move in 1,000 different ways to bring you together, and then when you came together, you got glued by God. Write that on the doorpost of your house somewhere. I love you. I'm glued to you. Like that would be very biblical. And in fact, actually, what that means is you're bound to each other. What it also means is you're accountable to God for your marriage. I like what one commentator said about this point. It was God who made this union possible. It was God who issued the command to you to be fruitful and multiply. It was God who said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him, and then gave you your wife as that helper. It was God who established the institution of marriage and your marriage. Marriage is indeed an honorable estate, a position. Therefore, let not man separate what God has joined together. The ungluing of people almost certainly will damage both people. And if you are having walked through that, I'm not meaning to just be ungracious or unkind or hurtful or any of that kind of thing. I am talking to those who are married, and the Bible is speaking to them now. We'll speak to others in this same gospel in just a moment. But I just want you to walk away today going like, man, what a blessing. What a blessing to be married. Like, I just want you to not just see this as a burden. Like, oh, okay, here are some directions I just have to follow. Oh man, this is gonna be tough. Great. My week just got ruined because of all the ways I have to lay out this marriage stuff. No, this is a joy to see. Like God gave us the good gift of marriage from the beginning so that we might enjoy it as we pursue him. So out of the joy that the Lord gives in marriage, let that be the strength to continue to live out your marriage. And in that way, we turn to the concession. Now, this is in verses 7 to 9, because the Pharisees hear all this marvelous teaching about marriage, and they don't really care. Did you notice in verse 7? They're like, yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. Let's go back to divorce. So that's what they ask. Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? So they're, again, going back to Deuteronomy 24, and this leads to Jesus' response, which I want to break down for us here about the concession. First of all, divorce is an allowance, not a necessity. Look at verse 7 in their question. They said to him, why then did Moses command? Well, that's a misreading of Deuteronomy 24. The Bible, Moses is not commanding people to divorce their wives for a certain reason. It's an allowance. In the Hebrew grammar, it's not a command. They had misread the text, and so they had misunderstood the issue. So what Moses was doing was to simply allow for it to happen and then try to regulate it from happening too often. So the idea here is, you don't have to divorce in the case of sexual immorality. You have the freedom to forgive your spouse and to be restored to your spouse in your marriage. Or you could also have the freedom, if there's been sexual immorality, to divorce your spouse. There's an allowance, not a command. There's freedom here, not necessity. And I would encourage you, if you find yourself in this place, like if you find yourself in the place where your spouse has been unfaithful, before you jump, just get counsel. Just get counsel. And I would encourage you to go to, you can go to a brother or sister that you really trust, that's true. You should also come to some leader for counsel too. Your brother or sister may have walked through something like this before, but maybe not. Almost certainly some leader in the church has had experience with walking people through something like this and can bring practical help to bear from the scriptures. This is a hard one when it happens. And with the options before you that Jesus puts before you, don't race ahead. Pray your way ahead. And then the second thing to notice here in this passage is that divorce is due to hard-heartedness. Divorce is due to hard-heartedness. So the reason why marriages go south is not because of the institution of marriage. You hear this sometimes in our time. People out in the world will say like, marriage is just broken. No, it's not. The people within the marriages are broken. The institution of marriage is golden. So let's not let ourselves begin to buy the lie that the problem with marriage is marriage. No, the problem with marriage is that our hearts are hard. Let me say it like this. If you were to take away hard-heartedness in marriages, you would also have to take away divorce laws. They wouldn't be needed. Divorce attorneys, they wouldn't be needed. Divorce courts, they would close down. And divorce settlements. Divorce would die in this country if husbands and wives would just soften their hearts toward their spouse. God allows divorce in the case of immorality due to people's hardness of heart. It's his concession. People's hearts will harden. I will allow for divorce to occur in those cases of immorality. And then divorce is allowed for immorality is the statement that Jesus makes in verse 9 and says so with authority. I say to you, now don't miss the main point of verse 9 though. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Grammatically, that's the main point. So don't miss the main point. That whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, and marries another commits adultery. So we'll come to that except clause, called the exception clause, in a second. But I just want you to know that many people in churches going back a ways thought that this one ground for divorce was because of adultery. But you'll notice that the text does not say that. Look carefully at the text in verse 9. Sexual immorality and adultery both occur, and they're both different words in the Greek. The word for adultery is the word moikeia. It means what you think it means. I'm trying to keep this a little bit PG here for the sake of children. Porneia is broader than adultery, though it includes it. It refers to different kinds of sexual sin. Interestingly, the word comes from the Greek word parnemi, which means to sell, referring to prostitution. The Latin term for this same sexual immorality, the Latin term is fornix, from which we derive our English term fornication. Fornix refers to the arch of a temple doorway, which is where temple prostitutes would stand and wait, in the fornix. So taken all together then, porneia is any kind of sexual act occurring outside the marriage relationship. It's sin, it's immorality, and it's grounds for divorce. Paul's going to pick up Jesus' foundational teaching here in 1 Corinthians 7 and expound upon it, but we're not in 1 Corinthians, we're in Matthew 19, so that's enough to say about that. If you have questions, we have spent a lot of time as elders and as pastors and as staff thinking through the different nuances of what porneia might include, but for now, that's sufficient. We want to move on to end where the Bible ends in our passage today with this passage at the end in verses 10 through 12. And I think the easiest way, and I spent time thinking about this, the easiest way to address this is it's speaking about single people in our church. I mean, the disciples in verse 10 are struggling with what Jesus just got done saying. They're like, man, that is super tough. Like, if that's the standard for marriage, and if that's the exception for divorce, it's just better not to marry. Now, that question reveals something about the disciples. It reveals what a lot of people think about marriage today. They see marriage as something that's good as long as it's profitable. For whom? For them. For them. I mean, if it's going to be that hard, Jesus, I would rather not get married. Implication, because I don't want things in my life that are hard. I don't want a hard marriage. I want something that's easy. And so, with so many other people today, in our age, in our time, they seem to be obsessed by the idea, what can I get out of marriage for myself? And I would just tell you, if you're heading into marriage, and you're heading into marriage thinking, this is gonna be so awesome, man, I can't wait, it's gonna be so great. I mean, I'm gonna be so satisfied in marriage, it's gonna be so amazing. Implication, for me. Well, then you just need to go through premarital counseling and realize that's true. And it will be great for you because you're going to make it great for your husband or for your wife. And the more you make marriage great for them, the greater it's going to be for you. But if you're only in it for you and not for them, then you're going to find that your marriage is super tough. And so the question should have been, how can I use this amazing gift of marriage for the benefit of my wife, my children, and others around me? For Christ and for his kingdom. How can I take this amazing gift of grace and use it for others in my life? And then find that the joy of the marriage ricochets back to me as I throw and pour joy into others. Now, Jesus, in his response to the disciples, he says twice, now look, not everybody's gonna be able to receive this. And then he starts talking about eunuchs. So I'm not going to get into the context of what it means to be a eunuch. You can go do that on your own time. I'm just telling you, the point of the text that Jesus is addressing here is that in that time, eunuchs were unmarried. They were unmarried. So the point of the text here in Jesus' response is addressing singles in verses 11 and 12. That's, to me, very evident. And he lists three different kinds of people that are single in verse 12. First, there are those who are born unable to marry for any number of different reasons back then, or maybe today. Second, there are those who have been made eunuchs by other people, and back then it was for the service of a eunuch. It was in the service of a royal harem or the royal court, or if you were a prisoner of war. And so that's option number two, and that doesn't apply to us today. But the last category, at the end of verse 12, does have some parallel to us today. Those who choose to remain single for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. those who choose to remain single for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. That's a parallel to verse 12. This third category of what you can call voluntary singleness, Paul picks up on in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 7 and 8, and he says about it, I wish that more people were like me. I mean, the first thing we want to say is voluntary singleness is what Jesus chose. He wasn't waiting to get married, but he couldn't find anybody. No, he chose to remain single. Now, he did that because he was unique in his person, right? I understand that. But Paul was single and actually commended it to people so that they could be more single-mindedly devoted to Christ. It's not a deficit to be single. It can be an asset to be single for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. So be encouraged if that's where you find yourself today. Know, too, that the honor of the first Gentile convert in the book of Acts is a single person. Like that honor gets bestowed on the Ethiopian eunuch who is on fire for Yahweh, and then he bumps into Philip, or Philip bumps into him. Philip leads him to Christ, and he's on fire for Christ. And he gets access because of who he is into the courtroom of the Queen of Ethiopia, Queen Candace. He gets into places because of who he is that married people can't get into. And you're like, that doesn't happen today. I totally disagree with that. It happens all the time. We right now are supporting a single missionary, a single man, who is doing insane stuff to reach people for Christ in places where no couple could get into. I sat down and caught up with him back in March. And I was like, man, it's his stories he just shares are unbelievable. It just like blows me away what he does. And I asked him about it. He's like, I just have devoted myself to Christ. The guy is just, he's following the path of Christ and of Paul. This is not a low place to be. This is potentially a high place to be. And we desire at this church to honor singles who use their gifts to serve Christ. Listen, our singles ministry, I'd put on, in terms of their zeal for Christ, I'd put them on a plane with any of our married groups in this church, any of them, in terms of their effectiveness and their zeal to serve Christ. Most emphatically, they are not secondhand saints. They might be the people who are most acclimated to be on the front lines. And down through church history, that statement bears itself out. You want to know who especially is prone to be on the front lines? In missions? Single women. So we applaud and we honor those whom God has put in this place. They're doing it, look at your Bibles, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And by the way, that's the crescendo of the passage. So if you're looking at like, where do we put the emphasis in the passage? It's on that. It's on that. That your singleness, if that's where you're at this morning, can be maximized and just be so honored by God and by us in this church as you lay yourself out in sacrifice for Christ. By the way, I hope you've noticed now that we also have seen the same focus on marriage, that marriage is to be subjected to Jesus Christ himself. It's Christ first, your husband second. It's Jesus first and your wife second. And in doing so, your marriage now bears witness to the supremacy of Christ in your life. The point of this passage is that our homes are to be subjected to his kingdom as part of the kingdom. So, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, let's go out this week and leverage our marriage and our singleness for Christ and his kingdom. All right? Father, thank you so much for this time this morning. It's been good to have been here and to be reminded of this passage is so good. It's just, man, Lord, it's a shot in the arm. It's a corrective. It's maybe even humbling, but it's also exciting. God, I pray that you would send us away from here this morning with just fresh energy and vigor and vitality and zeal to pursue Christ in our singleness or to pursue Christ in our marriages, in our homes, so that he might be seen to be all in all in this church. So help us, Lord, to that end. Give us the grace to joyfully pursue Christ with where you have us. We pray all of this in his name and for his sake. Amen.